Okay, grade 8. Welcome to your new chapter, this third essential outcome of grade 8 math. This is your algebra chapter, isolating variables and such. So as a warm-up, what I've given you here is 9 questions you probably would have seen in grade 7. Some of you not so much with the modeling, but all of you with the opposite operation. So as we go through these, just kind of think about uh, the questions, and if you need to refer to it again, just watch this video a few times. My voice is very soothing. It's very soothing. So the first one, it actually is a picture of an algebraic equation. And what it actually says, this is an x. Solid ones are really positive ones, and these are all negative ones. So what this really says is x plus 1 equals negative 3. That's what this question really says. So x plus 1 equals negative 3. And if I was to solve that, I want to get rid of everything except for the x. I want to keep the x's on this side. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a negative 1 on this side. And if I put something on one side of an equation in algebra, I got to make sure I do the same thing on the other side. Otherwise, this equal sign is no longer true, because if I take something away or add something to one side, I have to do the same thing. And what ends up happening is that gets rid of my constant, because my constant was positive 1. And what I end up with is an answer, because on this side I now only have just an x, and I have 4 negatives. So my answer actually says x has a value of negative 4. Okay? That's the answer for the first question. Negative 4. So don't forget, in these questions, the open circles are negatives, and the closed circles or the shaded in are positive. So our next equation actually says 2x's is equal to negative 4. That's what it actually says. But if I solve it with opposite operation, what I want to do is I want to make smaller scales, and I want to divide my x's equally onto both of those. So if the weight of 2x's has negative 4, then the weight of 1x should be equally dispersing what's on the other side, in this case negative 2. And we see from our scale that x has a value of negative 2. Okay? Going back to what we said, it was 2x equals negative 4. So negative 4. So x times what 2 is negative 4? The answer is x has to be negative 2. Okay. That didn't come out so well. The next one, what it really says is 2x minus 2 equals positive 2. All right, so if I want to isolate the variable, I'll erase this first. I'm going to first add 2 to this side, and I'm going to add 2 to this side. And by doing so, I get rid of my 0 pairs, and I have a new scale that says 2x's is equal to 4 positives, which is almost identical to what we had back here. We make 2 little mini scales, take each of my x, put them on there, take my 4 positives, put 2 on there, and this scale says x has a value of 2. So if I go back to what my original equation said, 2x minus 2 equals 2. If x is 2, that would be 4, and 4 minus 2 is 2. So yeah, x has a value of 2. In my next question, x minus 5 equals 2. Now for these, you're supposed to use opposite operation. And remember what we said? We said that when you are isolating the variable or getting x by itself, and there's either constants or coefficients, the first thing you should always get rid of is the constant. And the constant is the plus or minus part to your equation. So when we look at this, this is my constant right here. And if I want to get rid of that, I'm going to do the opposite. So instead of being negative 5 or minus 5, I'm going to add 5 to both sides. That creates a 0 pair, and I get x equals 7. Over here, I don't have, in the next question, I don't have a constant. There's no plus or minus part. So the only thing I have is a coefficient, and a coefficient is a multiplier. In this case, this says 4 multiplied by the value of x. And what you learned in grade 7 is if you want to get rid of a multiplier, you got to do the opposite operation, which is division. So you could either show it by dividing by 4 to both sides, or if you don't want to show it with a division symbol, you can actually do it the other way of just dividing by 4. And that actually says I'm dividing both sides by 4. When you divide by 4 and multiply by 4, those are opposite operations. You can put a line through them. You have just x left here, which means you've isolated the variable. And 12 divided by 4 is 3. So the value of x must be 3. And if we go back to what we originally wrote, 4 times what number is 12? Well, we know that 4 times 3 is 12, but we've solved it through opposite operation. X is 3. Now over here, the next question actually says a quarter of the value of 1, or the value of x, is 1. That's what that whole sentence says. A quarter of the value of x, or x divided by 4. So if it says a quarter of the value of x is 1, if I was to think of that as an algebra tile, if that's x, I only have that much of x. I only have a quarter of x. And I need how many of those to have all of x? I would need 4 of those. So really, if I had 4 of those, I'd have, I can't remember what number that was. 1. So if I have 4 of those, I would have 1. So what I'm going to really do is I'm going to multiply this side by 4. I'm going to show which is bracket 4, and over here bracket 4, going back to when we learned about integer multiplication. If you use brackets next to a number, that signifies multiplication. And multiplying by 4 and dividing by 4 are opposite operations, so you cancel them out. You have x isolated, and this says 1 times 4, which is 4. So what number divided by 4 is 1? Well, 4 divided by 4 has the same value as 1. Now in the next questions, I have 2x plus 1 equals 7. So in the next 3 questions, we actually have a 2-step algebraic, or in at least the next one, we have a 2-step algebraic equation where we have a constant and a coefficient. And we know, Charlie, from all of these practice questions that if you have both a constant and a coefficient, we have to use reverse bedmass in our thought process for opposite operation. Normally we would multiply and divide first if we were simplifying an order of operations question. But in isolating the variable, we actually do addition and subtraction first. We get rid of our constant. So the first thing I'm going to do is subtract 1 from both sides. And I'm left with 2x equals 6. Right? By subtracting 1 from both sides, I get 2x equals 6. Next thing I would do is divide both sides by 2 because it's opposite to multiplying. And I'm left with x equals 6 divided by 2, which is 3. And if I go back there and substitute it, 2 times 3 is 6. 6 plus 1 is 7. Yeah, x has to have a value of 3. Now the 8th question is kind of tricky. Do I have a coefficient? Do I have a multiplier to x? No. If I did write a coefficient, what would it be? 1. And that's not, dividing by 1 doesn't affect it, so we don't need to write it. But I do have a constant, and my constant's minus 4. If I thought about what this looked like drawn, it's 4 negatives and an x equals 3 positives. And if I wanted to get rid of that, I would simply add 4 to this side to get rid of that, and add 4 to this side. Right? But we're not drawing this, we're solving it using numbers. So what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to add 4 to both sides. And that creates a 0 pair. I'm left with x on this side and 7 over here, and my solution is x equals 7. And in the last question, 9, I have both a coefficient and a constant. If I was to draw this, it would look like this. A quarter of x plus 1 is 2. Right? If I was to draw this question, that's what it would look like. What would I do to both sides first? I would subtract 1 or add a negative 1 to both sides. But I'm not doing it with modeling, I'm doing it with numbers. So I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides, creating a 0 pair. I have a quarter of x equals 1. And if a quarter of x equals 1, if I quadruple that or multiply it by 4, instead of having a quarter of x, I would have all of x. And since I multiplied the left by 4, I must multiply the right by 4. And I get a solution of x equals 4. Okay? So that is your 9-minute and 22-second review of grade 7 algebra. Make sure you slap that like button. And if you make sure if you haven't subscribed, you've subscribed already.